You might have fun.
Alrighty. What's going on, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Time Out with Doc and Caveman. As always, you are here with Dr. Fantasy and the Fantasy Caveman. We are continuing to roll along, holy cow, with our NBA team previews. Today we're going to be talking about the Memphis Grizzlies. Before we start rolling, I just want to remind everybody to subscribe on YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts. We have plenty more of team previews to release, and we're going to be releasing some additional content in the next few weeks. So make sure you keep an eye out for that. But today we're talking about the very exciting Memphis Grizzlies. Last season, they were 38 and 34 under head coach Taylor Jenkins, which was good for 8th in the Western Conference in the regular season. And then they did win the play-in tournament and made their way to the playoff picture. Few random stats from last year. They were 15th in offensive rating, so literally right in the middle, and then sixth, literally average, and then 6th in defensive rating, so one of the better defensive teams, which kind of kept them afloat last year. One of their biggest issues last season, they were 20th in three-point percentage, so bottom 10 in the league there. And then they actually weren't great at defending the perimeter and the three-point line last year either. 18th in three-point percentage allowed, so in the negative half of the league for that stat as well. Slightly below average there. One of the interesting things, they led the entire league in points in the paint, which is not surprising considering they weren't very strong at the three-point line. And then Desmond Bane was on the all-rookie second team, which probably surprised a lot of people. He was one of the most veteran rookies coming into the league, but did have a strong season for them last year. So a few stat leaders for them. Ja Morant with 19.1 points. Dylan Brooks behind him with 17.2. Valanciunas at 17.1. And then Jaren Jackson at 14.4. Rebounds, Valanciunas at 12.5. Kyle Anderson at 5.7. And then Jaren Jackson and Brandon Clark at 5.6. Assists, you had Ja at 7.4. Tyus Jones at 3.7, and then Kyle Anderson at 3.6. Steals, a bunch of guys at the top here. Dylan Brooks, Kyle Anderson, and DeAnthony Melton at 1.2. And then blocks, unsurprisingly, Jaren Jackson at 1.6. Caveman, I would say actually a really successful season for the Grizzlies. They're one of the youngest teams in the league. Nobody really had them being in the playoff picture heading into last season. Not only did they make the play-in tournament, but then people continued to doubt them to win or come out of that, and then they won that as well. So a really successful season for this young Grizzlies team, but did anyone specifically stand out?
I mean, I'm not going to talk too much about Ja Morant. Obviously, Ja Morant's the best player on this team, and Ja Morant is my type of player, just electric and flashy, and just not your type of player. I doubt, but it's not like he did anything that was overly impressive. He just kind of got slightly better, I would say. But you mentioned it, Desmond Bain. You mentioned he was like a veteran rookie. He didn't look like a rookie. He looked like a vet that's been in the league for a while, and he was quite slept on. I believe he was like the 30th pick in the draft or something like that. He ended up becoming their lead guard off the bench. You mentioned he had solid averages and 9 points, 3 rebounds, 2 assists, and I just love how he didn't look like a rookie. That's kind of that's impressive in of itself. He had a solid overall game, and I really think he's primed this year to even take on a bigger role. One guy I want to mention, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on this. What exactly happened to Jaren Jackson last season?
What happened to Jaren Jackson?
Because I'm sure you were as well, but I was expecting a lot more from Jaren Jackson last season, and to me, maybe it was kind of he was hurt a bit last season, but to me he regressed, and I don't. That's from a guy as young as him. That's not something you want. You don't want to see a guy like this regress. So what was your overall take on Jaren Jackson last season?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a little unfair. He only played in 11 games last season, so he didn't appear that much. And I think it's the reality is that he just struggled with injuries. I mean, he didn't look very efficient from the 3-point line when he was playing, but defensively he was still there. He averaged the same number of blocks as he has for his career, but playing 5 less minutes per game. So he was still a great defensive presence for him. So I think it's one of those seasons I'm not gonna even give him a grade. I'll mark it as incomplete. So I don't think it's quite fair to really criticize it too much. I think I would be, but I think it's wild that people are judging him based off of a 11-game injury-riddled season. That's I mean, he's 22 years old. Now, to me, the key to this entire Grizzlies team moving forward is if Jackson and Ja continue to take step forwards. If they're not a dynamic duo moving forward, this is a team that's going to be, I mean, kind of like what the Pacers have been, just underwhelming every year. Like, sure, they make the playoffs, but are they ever serious title contenders? Ja, like you said, he was slightly better, but I think after a good rookie season, you want to see a guy kind of explode onto the scene. He didn't quite do that. They're both only 22, so I'm not saying they can't do that, but I think the entire future of this Grizzlies organization.
Let's call it what it is. Ja Morant is not your type of player.
That doesn't matter, though. He's still the type of player that when you mix him with Jaren Jackson, and they have a billion great 3-and-D players. If you mix them, it's kind of like what they're doing with Trae Young in Atlanta. If you mix a playmaker and a highlight reel like Ja Morant with a bunch of strong defenders and a guy like Jaren Jackson who can defend and shoot threes and do a little bit of everything for you, this is a team that has championship upside, but he needs to take that step and become that superstar and that guy offensively, because they were underwhelming offensively. That's a reality. This is a top-tier defensive team, but if they can't be more effective offensively, and a lot of that's going to be on Ja and Jaren Jackson's development as a duo, if they don't develop, this team's going to underwhelm for the next few years.
They're going to need to be what Trae Young and John Collins are in Atlanta.
That's exactly that's the reality. That's what they need to develop. We saw Trae Young take a huge step forward last year. And the reality is Ja's going to have to do the same thing if Memphis is going to make any noise. A few other random names that stood out to me. Kyle Anderson, who was drafted by the Spurs a few years back.
I'm shocked that you're bringing up Kyle Anderson.
I mean, it hurts if anything. He really never did anything with them, but Memphis gave him a big old contract when he hit free agency, but he was 63rd in player efficiency rating in the NBA last season. That's impressive. That's a high-end number 3 guy on most teams. So he averaged 12.5 points, 5 rebounds, 3.5 assists. He was very effective, a really strong defender. It was really, and he's getting paid over $15 million a season. It was the first time in his career that he looked like he kind of deserved that. So I think it was really promising for him. He had a really nice season that was really under the radar. Another guy that I want to mention who came off the bench primarily for him, but I just like his attitude, if we're being honest about it. He was in the top 100 in player efficiency rating as well, but that's DeAnthony Melton, who really was a really, really strong defender for them coming off the bench. And I think he carved out a really nice role for this team. So those are 2 guys that are really strong defensively.
I sense a common theme. They have a bunch of above average defenders.
That's literally what this entire team is. All right, let's go to what they've done this offseason. Through the draft, they had 2 draft picks, both in the first round. 10th was my boy Zaire Williams, my favorite prospect. No. If you didn't watch any of our prospect profiles, that is sarcasm.
Is he your boy or is Josh Primo your boy?
Neither one of those guys. Well, Primo hopefully will be my boy someday, but right now he's got to prove something to me. But Zaire went 10th overall, and then Santi Aldama went 30th overall to them. Other moves that they've made, we get to talk about another one of my boys. Steven Adams now finds himself in Memphis. Jeez. The greatest contract that the NBA has ever seen. Jarrett Culver Chris Dunn, Carson Edwards, Sam Merrill, Daniel Laturo. I gotta say all the names because you'll yell at me if I don't. Is that enough of them for you?
Yes, that's enough.
Okay, that's enough. Key losses. When I was going through the one site that I usually use for this, it was a little confusing because they made some deals where they traded for guys, but then they just traded them right away. So technically they're losses, but they're kind of not losses. So the Grizzlies actually have been fairly active in the trade market this season. So for example, they counted Patrick Beverley as a loss, but I mean, not really because they traded for him and then traded him away. But Grayson Allen, Eric Bledsoe, Marc Gasol, Juancho Hernan-Gomez, Jonte Porter, Rondo, Valanciunas, Justice Winslow. So those were some of the names that have kind of moved in and out of Memphis through the past year. So, man, as a whole, what do you think of this offseason?
Here's what I think overall. I have never seen a team be your type of team and not your type of team at the same time. First, let's just get that out of the way. I've never seen a team be the type of team that you would like, but at the same time you don't like them. That's weird. But the Zaire Williams pick is a bit confusing to me because I think the Grizzlies are in a spot where they could have picked a guy that was more ready to contribute now, and it would have helped them with more playoff success. Now, Zaire Williams has some of the highest upside in the draft class. There's no doubt that he could potentially be one of the best players to come out of this draft class, but he is also perhaps the biggest risk in this draft class. He could very potentially bust and be nothing in a couple years, in my opinion. But they saw enough of him, so I mean, I'm gonna give the Grizzlies the benefit of the doubt. They have a good culture. They have a good culture there with a ton of good defenders. So I mean, I think maybe this slightly favors Zaire Williams turning into something. But other than that, I mean, they had an eventful trade market, but not like a bunch of like noteworthy trades. They just made a bunch of smaller deals. I'm excited. See, that's why I know they're not your team because they got Steven Adams. Automatically makes them not your team.
You're out.
I'm excited. I mean, it was just kind of a blah, but eventful at the same time because they did make a lot of moves.
Yep. Yeah, so I agree. Zaire Williams definitely has a ton of upside. I think what that pick shows you is that they know that the biggest piece missing from this organization is just star-level players, if we're being honest about it. They have a lot of these guys, to me, they're all championship caliber role players. But then who do you look at as your superstars? It's got to be Jackson, and maybe they hope Zaire Williams develops into that. And if he ever lives up to his potential, we could be looking at a really nice trio right there. So I think that's kind of what they're banking on at this point. Zaire Williams.
I mean, I understand what they did with that pick. No, it's just wouldn't have been the route I would have preferred them to go, but it's their team.
Yeah, I think one of the big things that could hurt them is actually losing Valanciunas, and here goes me bashing Steven Adams already. Just let me bash Steven. I just hate that contract, okay? That's just for the record. I don't have a problem. The guy's making like $1 billion. He should not be making $1 billion, but I think that's the biggest loss for them because offensively they struggled quite a bit last season, or they were average. I won't say they struggled, but they need to be better offensively. And I think defensively, Valanciunas and Adams, you could argue, are fairly similar. But offensively, you lose quite a bit from Valanciunas to Adams.
Didn't Steven Adams start popping some threes last season?
I mean, that doesn't really... No, I don't care, honestly. No, he didn't, actually. He made like 2 last season. So it was the first time he made one in his career. So, I mean, let's not go... Oh, sorry. No. He made 1. Okay. Excuse me. But yeah, no, I mean, I think that's the concerning part to me is there was a lot of noise here in the offseason for Memphis with guys moving around, but I don't personally think they got any better. I think that they're solely relying on these young guys, Jaren Jackson specifically, really improving and taking the next step up to be all-stars and then hopefully potentially superstar level players. Because the reality is, if that doesn't happen, like I said, this is just a mediocre playoff team for the rest of eternity. Because when you look at their depth chart, let's roll into it now. In the backcourt, they have John. We haven't even talked about Dylan Brooks, who has been a really great 3-and-D player. Average over 16 points a game for him the last 2 seasons. Has been a really strong defender for him, but he starts at the 2 for him. Behind those two, I mean, you have a ton of great defensive depth. Tyus Jones stepped up when they had some injuries and played really well. DeAnthony Melton. They have Jarrett Culver now. Chris Dunn comes over, who's a really strong perimeter defender. Carson Edwards, I think, was a nice pickup. He hasn't done much in Boston, but he still has the potential and is young enough to potentially make some noise. So you got, and Zaire is probably going to play the 2 or 3 as well. Kyle Anderson at the 3. Desmond Bane is listed behind him, but he'll mix in the backcourt as well. All these guys are kind of swap everywhere. It doesn't really matter what position they're playing. In the front court, they have Jaren Jackson and Steven Adams listed as the starters, with Tillman, Aturo, and Brandon Clark listed behind Jaren Jackson and Steven Adams. So once again, I think they made a lot of moves. They had a lot of guys coming in and out. But the reality is, it was a lot of noise for me. It wasn't like their team actually got any better. They're going to be a top 10, top 7, top 8 defensive team, somewhere in that range, top tier defensive team. But do I see this team being better than, 14th, 13th, 14th, 15th in the league offensively? I personally don't. So unless Ja averages 30 points this season, which I do not think is going to happen. I think he potentially could someday. I think he has a lot of talent and he's explosive and fun to watch offensively. But they need those 2 guys, Jackson. I feel like I've said that a billion times, but that's basically the theme for me. This is a strong defensive team that needs to get it together offensively, and it all relies on those 2 guys.
I mean, those 2 guys, and I mean Zaire Williams as well. I mean, if Zaire Williams from year 1 shows the potential that he has, I mean, the future looks really good for them. If Jaren Jackson improves, if John Marant improves, Zaire Williams lives up to the potential